And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Tonight's weather, well, no big storms out here. We got a weak front here coming across the central Bering Sea down to a rather weak low just east of Atka Island. Some light precipitation with that. Otherwise, to the west and to the east, especially to the east here, mostly dry conditions. Winds starting to pick up here over the northern interior areas as cold air starts to pour down from the northeast. And this mediocre low there just southeast of Kodiak in the front starts to push some clouds up toward the coastline and a chance of maybe some light snow reaching the central and northern panhandle and then kind of just grazing the North Gulf Coast here into the southern Kenai Peninsula. For tomorrow, not much change here. This low kind of drifts to the east, still on the weak side there. A lot windier in the interior here with the blizzard warnings for the Arctic coast down through Anatuvik Pass, Central Brooks Range area. And very windy conditions there, up to 50 miles an hour with rather low wind chills, and stays dry for the panhandle. That front out west just dissipates into a very weak trough. And then for Friday, another weak front makes an appearance here, coming in toward the western Aleutian areas, and basically dry with light winds, southern Bering Sea, all the Aleutian chain up into the Bering Strait. Might be a little bit more of a breeze here for St. Lawrence Island. Winds start to come down in the afternoon here for the Brooks Range, but they don't end completely there. And lighter for the north slope area to the Arctic coast. Increasing chance of snow, south central Alaska, Copper River Basin, actually areas east and south of the Brooks Range there. Kind of mixed precipitation possibilities for the North Gulf Coast. And again, most of this moisture staying off the coast or along the coast of the Panhandle. And then for coastal, the wind forecast there for Lynn Canal and Stevens Passage, north 25 knots tomorrow, northwest at 15. For Stevens Passage, east 15 to 20 knots. For the south coast, central coast here, east at about 20 knots. And the north coast, east winds 25 to 30 knots. And for the day on Friday, even stronger winds here. Gale warnings for the north coast, east 30 to 45 knots. North 30 knots for Lynn Canal, Stevens Passage, north of 20 for the Clarence Strait area. And the south coast here, looking at east winds 25 knots with higher gusts. Prince William Sound tomorrow, northeast at 15. Cook Inlet, northeast winds 15 knots and 15-knot northeast winds for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. The North Gulf Coast, small craft advisories for east-northeasterlies at 25 to 30. And then for Friday, not much change for the North Gulf Coast. East-northeast, 20 to 30 knots, northeast at 20 for Prince William Sound. Cook Inlet, north to northeast, 15 to 20 knots and 20-knot northeast winds for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands. Kodiak Island tomorrow, variable winds in Shelikof Strait, otherwise generally north winds at 20 knots. West-northwest 15 for the Alaska Peninsula, northwest 15 for Bristol Bay. And then for Friday, we've got northeast winds here, 15 knots for the peninsula, northeast at 10 for Bristol Bay. And Kodiak Island, northeast winds 20 to 25 knots. Eastern Aleutians tomorrow, variable winds 10 to 15 knots, north 25 for Adak and Atka. And northwest 20 knots from Chitka Island, Kiska to Shemya, looking at south winds at 15 to 20. And then for Friday, east winds picking up here west of Kiska, 30 to 40 knots, southeast 20 to 25 from Chitka Island. But light winds, light variable winds at 10 knots for Adak and Atka, and variable winds 10 to 15 knots for the eastern Aleutians. Southwest coast tomorrow, north to northeast winds at 20 knots. There with northeast 20-knot winds for St. Lawrence Island and Norton Sound, light variable winds for the Pribilofs, and northeast winds at 15 knots for St. Matthew Island. And for Friday, Kuskokwim Delta Coast, north at 20, northeast winds 15 knots. St. Matthew Island, for the Yukon Delta Coast to St. Lawrence Island, northeast at 20 for Norton Sound. And 25-knot northeast winds for St. Matthew Island, east at 15 for the Pribilofs. And pretty windy tomorrow for the entire Arctic coast, looking at east winds 25 to 35 knots for the Chukchi Sea, east to northeast winds 20 to 35 knots. And for the day Friday, Chukchi Sea, northeast winds 20 to 35 knots, east winds for the central and western Arctic coast at 30 knots. Gale force easterlies for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast at about 35 knots.